from the heart of rural France. This is the Keto Woman podcast, brought to you by me. Hello Keto lovelies, I'm Daisy Brackenhall, and I've spent most of my life struggling with my weight and confidence, and have always had a difficult relationship with food. Even when I finally got to my target weight after weight loss surgery and eating low carb, I couldn't maintain it and I was miserable. I've been keto now for over 2 years, and it has given me the freedom to fall in love with food again without the constant gain, loss, guilt, virtue cycle of before. Health and happiness is where it's at now, running on fat. Welcome to the Keto Woman podcast. Each week I'll be chatting to inspirational women, maybe even the odd man, to discover the secrets to their success so that I can share them with you. So what is keto? Keto is a way of eating that enables you to switch your body's main fuel source from sugar to fat. Who doesn't want to be a fat burner, right? But how do we achieve this? A great place to start is by keeping carbs under 20 grams a day. So things like leafy greens and above ground vegetables, plus some nuts and seeds and the incidental carbs you find in things like full fat dairy. Choose delicious fatty proteins and be free and easy with oily dressings on salad and butter on your veggies. Once you're in the swing of things, you can tweak it to suit you. Make your own personalized keto. You'll hear all sorts of ways to keto from my guests. There is no one way to do keto, no one size fits all. I hope to show you just how flexible and fabulous this way of eating can be. I'm not a doctor, and most of my guests won't be either, so we really can't give you medical advice. It's always best to consult your own doctor when making big changes to your diet and lifestyle, because they know you and your medical history, and so have access to the bigger picture. Wouldn't it be helpful to have one place where you could find all the links? Want to sign up to my new Patreon exclusive Facebook group, Daisy's Lovelies? No problem. How about subscribing to my YouTube channel? Please help me notch up my first 1,000 subscribers by going to links.ketowomanpodcast.com and following the YouTube link. Not following me on Instagram yet? Hit the Instagram button. You get the idea. All the buttons, all the links you need are at links.ketowomanpodcast.com. Hello and welcome to episode number 175. I'm here. I have arrived in the UK. I've actually been here for about a week now and I'm exhausted. So I am bringing you another repeat episode, this time from Georgia Ede. I had to think about who I'd like to listen to again, and the first person that popped into my mind was Georgia Ede. I remember so vividly how excited I was to meet Georgia across the web waves for the first time and how much I enjoyed our interview. This episode is dated way back in summer of 2018, and since then I've had the great pleasure of meeting Georgia a few times, and I really can tell you that she is every bit and more so lovely than she sounds in her interviews. And if you've had the pleasure of watching some of her presentations on YouTube, or indeed in person, like I've had the good fortune of seeing her live at some of the American low-carb conferences. It's really true that moving home is one of the most stressful things you'll ever do. I certainly found it so. And I didn't make life easy for myself and ended up not sleeping for 60 hours, driving through the night to get to the ferry, working all hours, trying to get everything packed. And it was still a real last minute rush, and just a nightmare that I certainly don't want to relive in a hurry. So I think I'm just trying to catch up on that lost sleep and kind of enjoying, in a way, my enforced 10-day self-isolation in my new flat. The weather here, I'm a Brit. I always have to mention the weather, but it has been glorious. Sunshine all the way from the first glimpses of the white cliffs of not Dover, but not far from when I arrived on the ferry to now. And for the foreseeable, apparently, it's just been sunny and relatively warm and lovely. So the dogs and I have been enjoying the maisonette, although the dogs refuse to go down to the basement level. I think they're still a little bit terrified. They're going to have to brave it soon, though, if they want to go for a walk when we're released on Monday and allowed to roam again. But Bets has been out with me the couple of times I've popped out briefly to post my required COVID tests. But they've been out in the garden. Amy was hilarious the other day. She obviously needed to blow off some steam, and she ran round and round a garden that is too small for her, really. So she kept bashing into the fences. But they've been enjoying it. Rocket's been having a good time. I've been having to keep an eye on him as he's spotted the squirrels and other wildlife, and he has a tendency to bark. So we've been working very hard on that, as we now have neighbours all around us that we have to be far more considerate about. So that's just a bit of updated news. And I'm sorry to land you with a repeat again, but I think you'll enjoy listening to Georgia again if you didn't get to catch this episode the first time round. And hopefully business will be back to normal soon. This might be a bit echoey because I have very, very high ceilings here. Once the downstairs level is done, it will be a bit better for podcasting because the ceilings aren't quite so high. But there are all sorts of problems downstairs. I'm going to try and get my act together and do some YouTube videos so you can see some of the damp and mold horrors that lie in wait underneath the lino that's covering it up. There's a lot of work to do, but I quite enjoy renovating old places, bringing them back to life. This old girl has got great bones, but she's been abused and neglected for many, many years. So she needs a good bit of work doing to her, and it's going to take some time. So I'll stop rambling on and jump in to the introduction to this episode with the very wonderful Georgia Ede. This week's extraordinary woman is Georgia Ede. Georgia Ede, MD, is a Harvard-trained psychiatrist specializing in nutrition and college mental health, and was the first psychiatrist at Harvard University Health Services to offer nutritional consultation as an alternative to medication management. Dr. Ede speaks internationally on a wide range of nutrition topics, including Alzheimer's prevention, the nutritional differences between plant and animal foods, and dietary strategies to optimize brain health. She writes about food and the brain for psychologytoday.com and about all aspects of food and health on her own website, diagnosisdiet.com. I've been looking forward to recording with Georgia for a while now after watching her presentation at Low Carb Breckenridge. I find the subject of how nutrition impacts mental health fascinating and have seen what a difference eating ketogenically can make firsthand. I have by no means perfected the balance yet, and Georgia gave me plenty to think about and ideas for how to tweak my own diet to get even better results moving forward. Welcome, Georgia, to the Keto Woman podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Lovely and warm and sunny here.
Here as well. It's been a beautiful week.
I gather it's going to be very hot and sticky when I'm in New London for Keto Fest, so I'm getting prepared.
I hope you enjoy it nonetheless.
Oh, I can't wait. It's going to be very, very exciting. I've been looking forward to it for months now. So tell us a little bit about you.
Well, that's so interesting. As a psychiatrist, I'm usually the one who asks that question. Let's see, a little bit about me. I'm 53 years old, and I'm a psychiatrist, and I've been a psychiatrist for about 20 years. And I love my work. I love the field of psychiatry, but as you know, and your listeners probably know, I eventually changed the model of my practice from very traditional a combination of medications and psychotherapy, maybe, I don't know, maybe close to 10 years ago now, and started incorporating nutrition consultation into my work. And that has, it's been really just wonderful to have something else to offer people. Not everybody is interested in nutrition, but at least there are alternatives that I think really work well and empower people, so that instead of, saying, well, I have bipolar disorder, I have depression, or I need help with my anxiety, we can start to talk together about, well, what's causing that to begin with? Maybe it's not you. Maybe there's something about the foods that you're eating which are throwing off your chemistry. And so it just changes the whole feel of working together with somebody on that. It feels less personal, and a lot more empowering. So I really enjoy talking with people about food and thinking about food together. And every single conversation is completely different because the person that I'm talking with is a unique individual. So there's always more to learn and I learn from them, they learn from me, I learn from all of you, everybody else in the nutrition community. So I feel like my work went from feeling fairly solitary and traditional to completely open and hopeful, much more hopeful than it had been before. I still use a lot of medication therapy in my work, not just with people who are not interested in nutrition, but also sometimes as a combination approach. So, I think that there is still a role for medications, but for people who are interested in nutrition, there's so much that's possible in terms of improving how you feel emotionally and physically, of course.
It's really interesting you're saying about that two-way process with the patient, client, and the counselor therapist. It reminded me when you were talking about the sessions I was having for a fair time last year with my counsellor, and he was fascinated. He didn't know much at all about nutrition, and he was fascinated to see the impact it had on me. And I can remember describing to him once, with how I felt with my depression of being down the bottom of this deep dark well, and he was there to help me. But I said that the thing with diet and nutrition, what I've come to realize is if you can get a handle on that and get it right for you, all of a sudden you start to see these hand and footholds in the well, and it makes your job up there in the light where I can see you trying to haul me up that much easier. And I said, it's it might be something that when it's appropriate, that is something that you can mention to your clients. If you feel like you have someone who's maybe similar to what you found dealing with me. I said, because it's made such a difference to me. I can see it impacting your work. And he was fascinated by it. And I think probably, did take it on board. So it's not just a one-way process, is it, therapy?
Not at all, if you've got a good therapist. And it sounds like you do, or two comments about your experience. One is that I love the analogy you used about the well and the footholds. I think that's brilliant. And the other thing is that how lucky you were to have a therapist who's open-minded, because even though, of course, all good therapists would be open-minded and curious, it's not always the case. And so that's just a really lucky combination, the two of you.
Yes, I must admit, I was put off therapy for a number of years by going to a counsellor once who I didn't get on that well with. And yes, when I found this, I did a lot of research, and I actually did it, online. We worked via Skype because there was no one here in France that, although I speak French reasonably well, it was something that I felt I had to be doing in English. I couldn't manage it in French. And so I was looking for someone online and found him. And he said, the most important thing about therapy, it doesn't matter what kind of system that they use, the thing that's key to it working well for you is the relationship you have with your therapist.
That's 100% correct. And there have been studies that show that.
Yes, he said that.
It doesn't matter if it's EMDR or, traditional sort of psychoanalytic psychotherapy, doesn't matter. It's about the alliance, the connection, the working relationship between the two people. So that's really key.
Exactly. And so you mentioned there that you changed your approach when you found out, presumably, about low carb and keto and its impact on yourself. How did you come upon it? Why did those changes happen?
Well, so I've always struggled with my weight ever since I was a very young child, and so I had been on all kinds of diets growing up, and my mom and sisters also all kinds of diets growing up. We all struggled with our weight to a greater or less extent. So, I grew up eating low calorie, 1,000 calories a day, and trying to exercise every day and all those sorts of things. It was miserable. It was really difficult. It was sometimes successful and sometimes not. It just wasn't sustainable because I was hungry all the time. And so my weight was just go up and down throughout my teens and 20s. At some point, my mom, when I was in medical school, she became aware of the Atkins diet, and she lost 90 pounds on the Atkins diet.
Wow.
And that inspired me. And I'd been eating kind of low fat, low calorie, a low cholesterol diet for years at that point with some limited success. And I was really inspired by her. And I thought, well, maybe there's something to that. So I tried the Atkins diet sort of the way that she had been doing it, and it didn't actually gained weight on it. And I understand in retrospect why that happened, and I can tell you more about that if you're curious. But I eventually had I switched to a low glycemic index diet, more of a South Beach kind of diet in my 30s, and that actually helped a lot. That combined with exercise was easier than the other plans I'd tried. But then as I became older, sort of my late 30s, early 40s, that stopped working. And so I switched to a low carb diet in my late 30s or so, and that helped a lot more. It wasn't, I'm going to make a distinction between the low carb diet that I found helpful compared to the Atkins diet. I mean, it's just the way that I was doing the Atkins diet. I saw the Atkins diet as a license to eat as much as I wanted in terms of protein and fat and dairy and heavy cream and things like that. And for me personally, that was not a good fit. I was just eating too much and too many calories, too much fat for my metabolism. So the way I did it, I revamped it, and I also changed I discovered along the way I had some dairy sensitivity. So I did a low carb diet without much dairy in it, and that helped me a lot. Again, better than anything else that I had ever tried. It was still a struggle, but it worked fairly well. And then I attended the Ancestral Health Symposium in 2012 at Harvard. I spoke there for the first time. I gave a talk about vegetables, the sort of pros and cons of eating vegetables. At that conference, I heard several speakers talk about various different versions of a ketogenic diet. I'd never heard the word ketogenic before. I heard Ron Rosedale speak in particular. His lecture really stuck with me about the potential value of limiting protein. And I thought, well, that makes perfect sense to me. I'm going to try that. And when I did that, all the pieces seemed to fall into place for me. It was no longer hard work to keep my weight in a normal range. And so I've been doing some version of that since maybe for the past 5 years or so, 5 or 6 years. So my low carb history is not what got me interested in nutrition, because I've always viewed food as a way to control my weight. I've always understood the connection between food and weight. I never understood the connection between food and other aspects of health, particularly mental health, until in my early 40s, about 10 years ago, I started developing all these mysterious symptoms that all my very smart Harvard-educated doctors, I was working at Harvard at the time, couldn't help me with. So fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue and migraines and IBS. And it was really impacting my ability to work. It was starting to get difficult to go to work. I was exhausted all the time and never felt well. So I just thought, well, I'm just getting older. This is just what happens. And it was happening to so many of my middle-aged patients. I thought, well, this is just, okay, it's my time. But it was impacting my life so much. And all of my tests were normal. Every blood test, every imaging test, all kinds of tests I had, everything was completely normal. So because a big issue I was having happened to be digestive, I was having a lot of stomach pain. And of course, it was worse after eating. I thought, well, maybe if I experiment with my diet a little bit, because I was already eating low carb, maybe if I experiment with my diet a little bit, maybe there's something that's bothering me. So over about 6 months, I just kept a food and symptom journal and kept track of the foods I was eating and how I was feeling after I would eat or the next day. And just by trial and error, I changed my diet. It was already a low carb diet, but it was a high fiber diet. It had a lot of plants and soy milk and all kinds of other things in it, and Splenda and Diet Coke and big salads and all kinds of and tofu. I still kind of followed those guidelines around food choices, but kept my macros in the low carb range. So, but that's the diet that made me really quite sick. And so I discovered after about 6 months of trial and error that I was able to reverse. I had zero symptoms of any of these things. After about 6 months, I felt completely well, and not just relieved of the new symptoms I'd had since my early 40s, but also I felt better than I ever had in my entire life, emotionally, physically, in every way.
That must have been a shock when you decided, well, this is just something I've got to put up with from now on in. And suddenly
I was completely, nobody was more surprised than I was to feel better. I thought, well, okay, maybe I'll get rid of the stomach pain. Maybe I'll make some progress there. But I had never thought the fatigue or the concentration problems or the migraines, I never thought any of that I never expected any of that to go away. And so the diet I ended up with was a mostly meat diet, very, very different from what I'd been eating before. It had almost no plants in it whatsoever. And I thought, well, this diet has cured me of everything I was concerned about, but it's going to kill me. It's going to give me heart disease, cancer, and all kinds of other things.
Heart attack on a plate, yeah.
I really believed that. And I thought, well, this is scary. I want to understand this better. So that's what got me interested in nutrition. That's when I started reading nutrition literature, the scientific articles, which I'd never done before. The vast majority of doctors of all stripes, including psychiatrists, we don't read that literature. And so it was fascinating. And as you know, you just scratch the surface of any one of these articles that's recommending whole grains or 10 cups of fruit and vegetables a day or what have you, or low fat. There is absolutely nothing there to support. There's no science to support any of those recommendations. And there's no science whatsoever. And I look for it. I go hunting for it. There's no science to support the belief that red meat, cholesterol, fat, animal foods, dairy is a different story, but animal foods like fish, poultry, red meat, no evidence that that's dangerous for us whatsoever. In fact, the opposite. There's plenty of evidence that it's important and vital to include these foods. So when my mental health had never been, a major concern. But I thought, well, my brain feels clear and my mood is actually better and my anxiety is gone. My sleep is better. My energy's better. What is that about? Okay, well, maybe it's good for my body, but how is it good for my brain? I never thought about that before. Because in psychiatry residency, 4 years of training after medical school, we didn't talk about food once, not even when it came to people with eating disorders. We never talked about nutrition once in 4 years. So I realized there was a lot to learn and understand about it. And there still is. I'm learning every day. And I started incorporating these principles into my psychiatric work because so many people don't want to take medicines or don't respond well to medicines, get side effects, or the medicines don't work. And then I felt at a loss to help them. And now I don't. I feel like, okay, I've got another road we can go down if they're open to it. So it's just felt great to be able to share what I've learned with people who are interested.
And it's fascinating, the effect. And I'm just wondering, because it's something that made me think of it. A friend of mine had issues with chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia, and the track she took in was that she read Dr. Sarno's book and she approached it from a mental health route. And what you've been talking about the physical aspect of what you eat and the impact that has on your brain, but it seems to be tied in and woven in with how you're feeling mental health wise. I just wondered what your opinions are about that approach, because a lot of people think it's pretty out there, but it had an incredible impact, completely changed her life.
Of course. And, it's not that psychological approaches aren't helpful. They're very helpful. The brain responds to all kinds of environmental changes. It responds to good relationships. It responds to fresh air and sunshine and exercise. It responds to positive thinking. It responds to food, medication. It responds to all kinds of things. It's very responsive, and any change can be helpful. But I really believe, that the most powerful way to change your brain chemistry is through food, because that's where the chemicals in the brain come from in the first place. And so that's where I think you can have a fundamental, root cause impact on your mental health, is if you literally change what your brain is made of. And you can actually do that. You have complete control over what your brain is made of. And I think that's really empowering.
Can you make those changes quite quickly? So, if you've had issues for a long time, that with hindsight, you can put a lot of that down to your diet and you change your diet. How quickly can you put those things right?
Well, two parts to that question. One is, how quickly can a person make the changes, which varies a lot depending on the person. But the other is, if you were to make the changes that we have come to understand, at least with our current understanding, might be the best changes to make. If you were to make those changes instantly, how quickly could you feel better? And most people, it's within a matter of days that they notice an improvement. It's not. The problem is, in the very first few days, you can actually feel worse. Mm-hmm. And that's true with a lot of dietary changes, especially if the change you're making is lowering your carbohydrate intake, removing something addictive like sugar or flour from your diet. You can feel pretty bad for a number of days, and for some people, even a little bit longer than that. But the key is to hold on and get through that withdrawal period, that adjustment period as your body and brain adjust. It's not fatal. It's not lethal. You'll feel miserable in many cases, but it's worth getting to the other side. It's just like drinking. People don't say, well, your first day of sobriety is not going to be the best day of your life. It's going to be really hard. But on the other side is waiting for you this amazing, different state of mind. A little patience and support will go a long way. So particularly with anxiety, people will tell me that it's really just a matter of days. Their anxiety level comes down once they get through the initial transition period. Depression can take longer. It depends on the type of depression and the types of food changes you're making. And some of the changes in the brain take a long, long time. For example, replacing the fatty acid content in the brain can take months. And so you can do a lot quickly with your, let me try to summarize it this way. The ways that food impacts your brain, there are different ways. So one way is these refined carbohydrates like sugar and flour and fruit juice and cereals and things like that. Those foods put your brain on a blood sugar and insulin roller coaster that's very destabilizing. And so I tell people refined carbohydrates are mood destabilizers. So rather than trying a mood stabilizing medication, why don't we take away the food that's destabilizing your mood and see how you do? So that stability comes within a matter of days. You can lower your blood sugar and insulin and smooth them out rather quickly if you know what you're doing. But there are other changes that take a lot more time. For example, if you've got an omega-3 fatty acid deficiency in the brain, like not enough DHA for your synapses to work properly, and for your neurotransmitter signaling system to work properly. That may take much longer. So there can be some immediate improvements and there can be some longer term benefits. A lot of people will say if they stick with these changes that they feel better and better and better and better over time. Sometimes months and even a year or two, continuing to see more improvements. So there's a fast response and a slower response, I guess I would say.
And being prepared to potentially, need to tweak it to suit you. You mentioned about how you followed the Atkins approach and you felt that you were eating too much. You felt it was a license to overeat protein and fat. And you found when you limited protein, but presumably that had an impact on your appetite, because I know it's one of the big things that was a problem for me, and one of the big things that bariatric surgery did really help for me. I used to eat a lot, whether it was healthy or whether it wasn't. I was a quantity girl. I just would go back for second helpings, for third helpings, and they were big platefuls, and I just seemed to have this bottomless pit. And it could have been a plate of, what I would consider healthy now, so fatty proteins and vegetables, not even many carbs on there, and I still would just want to eat a lot. And that is something that, although I can eat a lot more now than I could immediately post-op and the first year or so afterwards, what I find that is a really helpful, lasting influence from the bariatric surgery, and I had a sleeve, so just a restrictive type surgery, is that when I eat ketogenically, that restriction dials back in again. And I do feel that helps me. And I'm not saying that I eat like a mouse, because I don't. I do eat what I would consider about an average size portion that most women would eat, but it is nothing compared to the amount I used to eat. So I'm just wondering, because you mentioned that you like to eat a lot of food, how you found that playing around with those macro levels helped, because a lot of people who advocate high protein say that upping the protein is the way to satiate your appetite, and some people say it's with fat. And what kind of balance have you found that works well for you in that respect?
Well, thanks for that question, because I'm still learning about this for myself. I ate a ketogenic diet, meaning that I was checking my ketones and I was limiting my protein to, say, between 70 and 85 grams a day, something like that. And that was incredibly useful in getting my weight into maybe I should be more specific. So I actually did this experiment publicly and posted about it on my website when I was trying it, for better or for worse. And so I went from, I would usually, my weight would get stuck around the sort of the mid 150s or low 150s. If I was physically fit, it would just be stuck there. And I was actually pretty happy with that. I just had to really fight to keep it there. If I didn't work really, really hard, it would tend to drift up into the 160s rather easily. So when and
that's what's so frustrating, isn't it? It's one thing getting to your goal, but you've got to maintain that. So you have to find a way that's possible.
That's exactly right. And so until I started limiting protein, it still felt like a battle, a really conscious effort had to be made. So when I limited my protein, my appetite, as you're saying, my appetite just went away. I mean, hunger felt like a completely different experience. It wasn't this, I need to eat something now, or my brain would I would start imagining different types of foods that I wanted. It was a completely different experience on a truly ketogenic diet with lower protein and presence of ketones. I would suddenly, there was no sudden anything. There was no psychological discomfort. It was just, I think it's time to eat. Or I'd get a very, very, very slight headache, or I would just start to think, well, I must need food. But there was no psychological distress. There was no urgency. There was no discomfort. It was just, my body was saying, okay, might want to start thinking about finding some food. And the other fascinating thing is, if I couldn't access food right away, it was not a problem. I could go for hours and hours if I had something else to do or if I wasn't near food. And I could it was in the back of my mind. It was not in the forefront of my mind. There was no ravenousness. There was it's just a completely different experience. So that was magical for me in terms of understanding what true hunger actually is versus cravings. And so I did that, and my weight for the first time in my entire life, since I was maybe 12, was in the 130s. And I didn't understand how that was even possible. But I wasn't able to maintain that weight. I have gradually slipped back up into the 150s and so forth. I kind of stopped checking the ketones, and I kind of let the protein creep up again. And so I started having to be strict again. So last year I started to be strict again, checking my ketones and limiting my protein, and it didn't work. I was still gaining weight. And this was last year. My understanding, the way that I have come to interpret this is I was also starting to have some perimenopausal symptoms, an occasional hot flash, or, all kinds of other little occasional migraines, which run in my family around that time of life. And so I thought, okay, there's a hormonal shift going on here. I'm 53. Unbelievably, I think I actually have to find yet another diet to try to address this, because my weight was back up in the 160s again. Even as recently as low carb Breckenridge in February. And I was really struggling with this. So I was I had ketones. I was extremely low carb, 0 to 20 grams a day. I did not cheat for months in ketosis, gaining weight. So what I did was I changed about, maybe 6 or 7 weeks ago to a carnivore diet. And I've experimented with this a few times before, really briefly. This was the first time I committed to it, and with a full understanding of all my food sensitivities, including my sensitivity to aged and processed and cured meats, my histamine intolerance, and my dairy intolerance, and all of that. So I'm eating a carnivore diet now, and it is fantastic. I would say, so I've lost 9 pounds in about 6 weeks without even trying. And I feel better. All the hot flashes are gone. All of that stuff is gone. The migraines are gone. I'm in ketosis some days and not in others. So interesting. I'm still learning about what this means, what this might mean for me. But there's something different about taking all of the plants out that almost trumps ketosis in a way. That I can't explain. And
presumably you're eating more protein, if that's, albeit fatty protein, presumably, but if that's all you're eating, you can't go overly restricting it, because what else are you going to eat?
Exactly right. And I have not been counting protein grams. So if, now I may find that necessary to do along the way. Maybe this will only work until I get to a certain plateau. But for so far, I haven't needed to limit my protein grams. But I will say that it's sort of almost self-limiting. Like, I just don't want to overeat these foods. But it is interesting that I'm not in ketosis every day. Sometimes days my ketones are 2.0, and some days they're 0.1. And I still seem to be doing fine. So, but I don't have enough information yet. This is a very new experiment that I'm doing. So to be continued, I guess.
Isn't it fascinating, though, how you had one formula that worked very well for a time, and, it involved with ketones being in a certain range and certain kind of macro setup. Then you go back to that a while later, and the same thing doesn't work again, and you have to adapt it to something else. It just goes to show that there's not only one right approach for the individual, but that individual's approach changes over time, and it different, especially, I think, when we're going through those hormonal shifts.
Particularly for women. I really want to study and write about this, because I don't think, I haven't found much in the way of science addressing this topic, at least not for the general public. I'm fascinated by the the connection between hormones and nutrition and metabolism. And there is absolutely no question about it. Every woman knows this. It's different. It's different if you're a woman. It's just different. We are designed to make fat. We're designed to turn food into fat so that we can support a new life. And the other thing I think is really key difference between women and men. The main difference is estrogen, of course, not that men don't have any estrogen. We have a lot more estrogen than men do. During the reproductive years, women are designed to pay attention to their environment hormonally. We're constantly sampling the environment, the food environment, the stress environment, even weather, I believe, to see if the conditions are right to become pregnant. And so if you don't have enough calories coming in or the right types of calories or vitamins or nutrients, if you're under too much stress, pregnancy is not going to happen. Your body changes your hormonal balance so that you can't get pregnant under those circumstances. So we are tuned in, exquisitely tuned in to our internal and external environment in a way that men are not and do not need to be. So we're much more sensitive. We're much more sensitive to shifts in insulin, to changes in growth hormone levels, to stress, to food, dairy. I think women can be, in some cases, listening more closely to the hormonal signals that are naturally present in dairy products. And I do think it's unfortunate, but true, and I think really helpful to understand that.
That's interesting you say that. And you did mention earlier about a little caveat with dairy. And I know a lot of people do find, women in particular, different sensitivities with dairy. Perhaps you could just expand on that a bit, because it sounds like it is a bit of a special subject within, because it's such a perfect keto food, really, isn't it? It has the protein, it has the fat, it's very delicious. Often people find they have to restrict it because they can't stop eating it, but on the surface it seems to be a perfect food. So why is it causing problems for so many women?
Yeah, I think, some people do fine with dairy. And I really wish I were one of those people, because it's so delicious.
Yes, exactly.
So helpful. It just makes everything taste wonderful. So I think a few differences. So a lot of times people will talk about animal foods as in one lump. And they'll lump meat, seafood, poultry, and dairy and eggs into the same category. But there are huge differences between meat, seafood, poultry, and dairy, and perhaps even eggs. I need to be looking into eggs more closely in the near future. But dairy in particular, dairy is not meat. The types of fat that are in dairy are different. The types of proteins are different. The hormones are different. And the whole purpose of dairy. Dairy is a growth formula. It's a species-specific growth formula for a very young animal. So the dairy that we are raised on is a growth formula for baby cows. And this growth formula is incredibly effective at turning a tiny baby cow into a much bigger baby cow. That takes a lot of protein, it takes a lot of fat, and it also takes hormones and hormone signals. So that growth formula isn't just a source of calories, it's a source of signaling molecules that turns the growth system on in the baby cow. And it turns on the insulin and the growth factors in the baby cow. And of course, it can do the same thing for us. So for many of us, the last thing we might want is to be in growth mode every single day when we don't need to be growing. And there are some scientists who have hypothesized that dairy products may be partly responsible for some of the diseases of civilization that have to do with overgrowth, like cancer, or early onset of puberty in young people, or overweight in babies. So it may not be true for everyone, but there's solid science. We know that whey protein, for example, if you isolate whey protein from dairy, that raises not blood sugar levels. It doesn't touch your blood sugar. Whey protein raises your insulin levels just as much as refined carbohydrates do. So that is, not something that the average person with insulin resistance wants or needs. So some people need to be incredibly careful with dairy.
Have you seen, Richard Morris actually did an experiment with that. I don't know if you've seen the post on the forum. He compared eating actual egg whites with eating whey protein, and he measured what happened afterwards, because he was saying the same thing. This is what happens in theory, but I'm going to actually do the experiment and see what the differences are between the two. And yes, he not only had a larger response, but it lasted much, much, much longer with the whey protein than with the egg whites.
Kudos to Richard. I'm going to look that up. I'm writing it down. That is fascinating. I can't wait to see what he did.
I'll find you the link, but it was very interesting and very illuminating.
Absolutely. And I would be interested too to see a comparison. I would wonder if it might be even more pronounced if comparing whey protein to meat, because egg is also, it's like a growth formula for a baby chicken. So it may not have quite as profound effects as dairy. And I actually suspect it's a lot less problematic than dairy, but I wonder if it would be even more pronounced with an animal food that's not designed as a growth formula, like a piece of meat. So
it's a fascinating way to look at it. And when, as soon as you were saying that, I mean, the logic of it is so obvious. These substances are designed to literally fatten the calf.
Yes.
And so why are we going to behave differently? And, and the same for baby humans, that's how we grow them too, isn't it? So it makes sense that, like you say, that's not necessarily going to be the impact it has on everybody, but it could be the reason why some people really struggle to lose weight, and when they get rid of dairy, it really helps.
It really can. I know for me personally, I cannot eat dairy without becoming ravenously hungry the next day and obsessed with dairy products, and gaining weight. I cannot. If I eat dairy, even if I'm limiting my calories and in ketosis and all of that and not eating any carbs, I gain weight if I eat dairy, and there's just no way around it. So I think I'm particularly sensitive. I know a lot of people aren't as sensitive as I am. So I usually recommend it when people are struggling, either when they change to low carb and they still have food cravings, or they can't lose weight, or they've hit a plateau. I usually recommend that they at least experiment with that for a couple of weeks, a dairy-free couple of weeks, just to see if it makes a difference for them.
And presumably that's going to be the same regardless of the dairy, unless you're talking about something completely different where you react to cow's milk and you're okay with goat's milk. But anything that is given to a baby animal to grow is going to be the same problem.
Yes. And
even with, looking at lactose intolerance, I mean, I found I get very mucousy if I have too much lactose. But if I keep to the very lowest, finding 0 as much as I can, I don't have that issue. But I hadn't thought about this other issue, that it's switching on all these different signals in my body, and it's definitely given me something to think about and experiment with. It's just an interesting way, to look at it. And once you start looking at it that way, it seems so obvious.
It does make a lot of sense, but it's not necessarily easy to do these dairy experiments, because it's for people who are eating low carb, they've already given up so much. Giving up carbohydrates is difficult, and to contemplate having to give up one more thing is psychologically it's unfortunate, I guess we'll put it that way.
Exactly.
A lot of people who hit a weight plateau or are still struggling with certain food cravings, they, in most cases, have come so far. They have made such tremendous progress just by eliminating the carbohydrates that, you have to choose your battles. And we don't have to be perfect about these things. If you've plateaued at a weight that's 50 pounds below the weight you were before, that's a miracle, and that should be celebrated. And maybe that's where you want to stay, but for other people, they get frustrated and they want to be able to do more and be in a different place. And it just gives them another tool in the toolbox to see if they can achieve their goals.
Exactly. And to be honest, if that's all it came down to with me, if you said, you could be 10 pounds lighter if you never ate cheese again, or you can keep cheese in your life, I'd probably keep cheese in my life.
And no judgment. We all make our own choices, and we all get to eat what we want, and we all get to be how we want to be. I'm a huge believer in everybody. It's sort of eat and let eat, food is personal. Nobody else should be telling anybody else what to eat. Unless someone's come and asked me for advice, I don't tell people what to eat. I just give information, and they can do whatever they want with it.
That's what's key, isn't it, though, is having the information at your fingertips so that you can make educated decisions about what you want to eat and what you don't want to eat. Nobody likes to have to do something just because somebody's told them to do it. But if you explain all the consequences or potential consequences of eating this way, the potential benefits of stopping eating that, and then the decision is theirs.
That's right. And when I'm working with patients, clients, people, when I'm working with people, I really adopt a stance of curiosity, say, let's get curious about this together and see what we might discover, because everyone's so different. And when they make these different changes, I don't know what's going to happen. It's a brand new experiment every time. And I'm just as interested and curious as they are to see what happens. So rather than saying, here's what you should be doing. In fact, I don't even ask people what they eat, believe it or not. I used to. Early on, when I used to do nutrition consults, I made a lot of rookie mistakes. And one rookie mistake I made was assuming everybody wanted to know about nutrition. That's a rookie mistake. Another rookie mistake is asking people what they eat, because it actually doesn't matter. You're going to give the same information regardless. And if you ask people what they eat, they're put on the spot. They may not feel comfortable telling you, and they're going to instantly feel judged. And I don't actually need to know what they eat. I just need to give them the information about how food operates in the body, and then they can decide what to do. So I don't do that anymore.
Yes, no, fascinating. It's yes, I could just feel myself in that position of being questioned, and you do automatically go on the defensive, and automatically, probably because you've been piling on the guilt on yourself for so long, so you instantly get into that mode, don't you, when you're asked about what you eat, because that little voice in your head is already, so I told you you shouldn't be eating that. now you've got to own up and confess to all the rubbish you've been eating and be judged for it.
That's right. We just take that right off the table, so to speak.
Yes, that sounds like a great approach. And like you say, approach with curiosity, and then it's open for them to be curious, so they could then go on to ask you, presumably, more about it, and then potentially offer themselves what they ate, and see, when they feel in a safer space, well, this is what I've been eating. How do you then recommend how I change it? But it's coming from them rather than forced by you.
That's exactly right. And when we start this way with just non-judgmental, curious, explorers, more often than not, people will come back and want to tell me what they eat. What do you think this might be doing? Or how does this affect the body? And then we have a really fun conversation. I think it's, it's very personal. And especially for women, I think food can be quite personal, and it can be, for some people, a little bit of a third rail topic. And so there are people with whom I don't discuss it at all. I'll put out a little sort of thought balloon or a little feeler to see if they want to talk about it. And if not, we don't. Regardless of that, though, I make the same recommendation to everybody, which is I ask them permission if we can get some blood work so we can see where they're at on the insulin resistance spectrum, because that has such a major impact on mental health. And there's such simple tests, triglycerides and HDL and a fasting insulin, a fasting glucose. Glucose is probably the least important, but a few simple tests to see where they're at. And that's not a person. They can look at these numbers and it's not like getting somebody's weight. It's not like putting somebody on the scale. You're not as emotionally attached. If I say your fasting insulin is 16.1, you don't immediately feel shameful about that. So, and you can change it so quickly. So I ask them to get these tests and I talk about the tests with them. And it's really motivating because the tests can change so quickly, even within a few weeks, and they can see the numbers come down and they feel empowered. Say, like, look what I did. Look at the impact I've had on my life already, and my risk for Alzheimer's disease, and my risk for all kinds of health problems, diabetes and obesity and cancer and all kinds of things. So that can be really powerful, even without talking about diet at that point.
And great to get people thinking that way, thinking from the inside out rather than just focusing on weight.
Yeah, I don't talk about weight at all unless that's what they want to talk about. Weight is the least of my concerns. I don't care. I honestly do not care what somebody weighs. The weight is just a symptom of an underlying problem, and that's the problem we need to talk about. We need to talk about the metabolism, not about the weight. And I feel that talking about weight is it's the wrong thing to do, unless that's what the person wants to talk to you about.
Exactly, because like you say, all that's showing, if someone is showing on the surface that there's an issue with their weight because they're obese, so literally it's on the surface so you can see it, but all that's informing you of is that there's something going on. Like you say, there's an underlying problem somewhere that needs sorting out. But it's not indicative of all the things it becomes associated with those people who are carrying that around, visible for everybody to see, and get accused of being, lazy or greedy or all those other things. And that's what they're so used to having it associated with, aren't they? Rather than actually all that is associated with is the fact that it's an indication that something's going a bit wonky somewhere.
Exactly. It's just a clue. It's just a clue to a metabolic disorder. That's it. And it is hormonal. And people used to laugh at women for saying that who were overweight. They'd say, well, I have it's hormonal. Mm-hmm. And people used to laugh at them and say, oh, come on, it's not hormonal. It's that you're eating too much, or you're lazy, you're not exercising, or whatever, you're eating the wrong foods. It actually is hormonal. It's 100% true. We all know people who can eat whatever they want all day long for decades and never gain an ounce. And what is that about? So it's not that they're not. How do we not judge those people? I mean, it's not. I like to say, I use a similar model to a similar sentence that I use in my work around food that I also use with addiction, is that it's not your fault. You can do something about it if you want to. If you want to, there are things you can do about it. If you're trying to lose weight, if that's why you're coming in, if you're trying to lose weight, you can, if you have the right information, you can lose weight. But it's not your fault that you are overweight. It's just that you don't have the right information about how to change your internal chemistry. And the other thing is, and I think this is really sad but true, and I know it's true for myself, I think it's really helpful for people to understand that once you have been significantly overweight, you are forever different than everybody else. You will always have to work at it. That's just the sad truth, that your metabolism is broken in a certain way, will never go back to being normal. So you now have a lifelong condition. Even if your weight, you've managed to get it back into the normal range, that does not mean that you're hormonally normal. You will still always be having to, if you choose to, take responsibility and manage this condition. And it's just not fair. And I tell people, it is not fair. It's not your fault. It's not fair. But there's something you can do about it if you want to. You can make progress.
And it's also terrifying to, I always feel that if ever, because I lost the weight and I had some regain, lost it again, and I do fluctuate a bit, and every time I go off the rails a bit and gain weight, the big thing that's pressing down is that I'm terrified of becoming twice my size again. I'm literally half the size I was, and I remember very vividly.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. But, I remember what it was like to be that size, and I didn't get to where I am now, but after the first surgery I had, I lost a considerable amount of weight. And then when that all went wrong, I put it all back on in an incredibly short period of time. In months, I literally ballooned. And yes, the overwhelming feelings of being back in that place again. So every time I think someone who's been considerably overweight, who's lost the weight, whenever they gain some weight, even if it's just half a stone or something, they're terrified that this is the slippery slope, and I'm just going to lose all control, and I'm going to end up where I was before. And it's terrifying, because you remember what it was like having to squeeze yourself into an aeroplane seat and, well, get the extender. I never did, actually. I always managed to somehow cover up the fact that the seat, but the belt wouldn't meet in the middle, because I was so ashamed, and I couldn't ask for the extender. So, happily potentially put my life at some risk purely because I didn't want to show the fact that I couldn't do the seatbelt up. So, you're terrified of getting, of ending up back in that place.
No, it's awful. And there's so much shame associated with it. People who don't have the right information feel really powerless, but even people, and hopeless often, but people, even those of us who have really good information, and there's still more to learn, I'm sure. Those of us who have access to really good information, that doesn't mean that we're perfect about it either, or even that following the best information we have is going to bring us to that ideal spot that we've, been told we should be aiming for. And I think there's a lot to be said about this, not just internal shame. I mean, everybody who's overweight knows that they're overweight, and they know that everybody else knows that they're overweight. You can't hide it. It's right there on the surface. Very different than so many other types of problems that are invisible. It's quite a visible thing. So there's the internal shame that you carry around. And then there's the judgment that comes primarily from people who have never had to deal with a weight problem in their entire lives. They have absolutely no idea how hard it is. They can't relate, and they're very quick to judge. I have so many people in my life, both professionally and personally, who have just been metabolically lucky, and they've never had to deal with these issues. And they have absolutely no concept of how hard it is. It's much, much easier with low carb, and it's even easier with ketogenic. And for me, it's even easier with carnivore ketogenic or intermittently ketogenic, or whatever I am right now. But think of all of the sacrifices and all of the work I've had to do. If I weren't doing all of these things, hadn't given up all of these foods and paid such careful attention and educated myself, I'm sure that I would be, in the 200 or 300 pound range, given my family history and my natural condition to gain weight. When people are judging other people's weight, they have absolutely no idea where that person is on their journey. I could be looking at a person who's 200 pounds, and they could have been 300 pounds last year. There's so much information you don't have. And I was referring a little while ago in our conversation to having gained some weight over the past year. And this was really difficult for me as somebody who specializes in nutrition to be gaining weight, because I know that affects my credibility. Mm-hmm. And it's not just a person. I mean, I personally I have worked very hard, and I no longer attach my self-worth to my weight. But other people who watch my videos or listen to me talk or read my work, I know that I'll lose a significant portion of my audience who I think could benefit from this information if I'm overweight. And because that sends a signal that I don't know what I'm talking about. And it happened. So when I gave my video at Low Carb Breckenridge, and I was probably, my weight was up in the 160s. I was really struggling. I was ketogenic every single day. I was eating 0 to 10, usually grams of carbohydrate per day. And I was gaining weight. And you could kind of see it on the video that I was a little heavier. And people commented on social media, and it was humiliating. And, saying, so things like, well, I don't know if I take advice from her, look at her, you want to take advice from an overweight nutrition expert, quote unquote. But I'm actually really glad that people, said those things, because it called my attention to, I think it's a really, really important issue. And I had to kind of psychologically work through that. Like, how did that make me feel? And what was I going to do about that? Was I going to write back? Was I going to say anything, or was I not going to say anything? In part, it motivated me. I've always been motivated to keep my weight in a normal range, but it motivated me to try to troubleshoot. Well, what am I doing wrong? Why am I still struggling? I knew it was hormonal, but I wasn't going to get online and talk about that. Or I wasn't ready to anyway. So I think, if that's me, just being, having gained, what was it? I think 13 or 14 pounds in a year and being a little bit overweight. What is it like for all of the women walking around who, have many tens of pounds or even 100 or 200 pounds to lose? What are they facing every single day in terms of the assumptions people make about where they're at and why they're there? I think it's hugely, hugely unfair.
Exactly. And why is that assumption that we only have credibility if we're somebody else's idea of perfect weight and size? I mean, it's crazy talk. It actually doesn't make any sense, and presumably probably actually says more about the insecurities of the person making that comment than it ever will do about the person they're making the comment about.
There are so many people in the nutrition science world and nutrition advocacy world and low carb world who are overweight. They're overweight. They've struggled. They've made tremendous progress. And sometimes they've relapsed, and they've taken huge heat for it. I feel like there is a tremendous amount of wisdom, experience, knowledge to be gained from people who are fighting that fight. You don't know where they are at in their fight or what's going on for them. You have no idea. And I learn from those people. I learn from recovered addicts more than I learn from people who can take one drink and walk away. People who have recovered from addiction and occasionally relapse, I learn from those people. They have a lot to teach us. So I don't discredit those people. In fact, I give them a ton of credit for being public about their struggles. So I think it's a huge waste of knowledge to discredit people for being overweight.
Yes, one thing, that snapshot of somebody tells you nothing about where they are in their journey anyway. You don't know you don't know how far along they are, whether they, and that's the only problem with being so visible. If you have got closer to your end goal and then had some kind of relapse, obviously people are just going to jump straight on that and love to judge, it seems. But I'd like to know, what is the perfect weight and size that equals credibility? Because I've seen the obvious cases where people are either just simply described as overweight and you don't know where they are on their journey, or you've seen them lose the weight and regain some. But then I've also seen criticism of people who are allegedly too thin. So how does that work then? So there's this magic number somewhere in the middle that what exactly is it? I just can't fathom it, because if somebody is metabolically healthy and happy and everything is going right in their lives. They can function very well and practically and do all the things they want to do and have the relationships they want to, and everything is right. But for some reason, you've decided that they're too thin or too fat, so they have no credibility. The logic. I'm a very logical person, and that has no logic whatsoever.
Well, I think that's a great point. I don't know what that magic number is, and I don't know what that magic weight is, or size, or appearance is. I really separate in my mind, and I think maybe most people don't do this, but in my mind, I separate the quality of the information that they're sharing and the integrity and the honesty that they're sharing with me. I separate that out from whatever they look like and wherever they are in their journey. But I think for a lot of people, appearance plays a huge role in our impressions of people, and that's just a biological fact. It's probably evolutionarily important, but we do judge, and we prejudge. We're naturally prejudiced visually. We make instantaneous decisions about. There have been all kinds of studies about this. Instantaneous decisions, conclusions about people based on their appearance, and there's not a lot I can do about that. But I would just encourage people to think twice. If someone is being honest and credible and open, and they're a person of integrity, and they're sharing with you their story, try to hear that story regardless of what they look like. And the other thing, and I guess this is something else that I think is important to say, I think it's perfectly fine if somebody has all this great information and chooses not to apply it. I think it's perfectly
yes.
fine. The person decides, you know what, I want to eat whatever I want to eat, and I want to be overweight, and that's okay. I've made that choice. I mean, that's fine. Food and weight, I don't think is a moral or ethical issue. It's very personal. And, if I don't consider myself a weight loss expert, and I don't, promote myself as a weight loss expert. I'm a psychiatrist, and I study nutrition, and that's that. I have my own experiences about weight loss to share. You can do with that what you will. But I think for people who promote themselves as weight loss experts, those people have a much tougher road if they're struggling themselves, because, it's basically like I'm sure in a lot of people's minds equating, getting sobriety information from someone who's actively drinking, which is different than someone who's struggling and being intermittently, relapsing. Relapse happens. Relapse is a normal and natural part of being a human being, and it's a normal, natural part of change. Change is not a straight line, and it's not about perfection. It's a process. You don't know where the person is in their process, so our weight goes up and down. The vast majority of us, our weight just isn't stable. And so if you don't have a broken hormonal system, your weight is stable. I grew up with friends who weighed the same amount. Their weight was the same every single day, within a few ounces or a pound, for years and years and years, no matter what they ate or what they did. That is a completely foreign experience to me. I have no idea what that would be like. So our thermostat is broken. And there's nothing we can do about that. We can only manage it as best we can. And it's hard.
It does seem to be something that's very specific to nutrition, doesn't it? That you have to, there's some kind of obligation to completely practice what you preach. I mean, there are people who study all sorts of different subjects and are experts in all sorts of different subjects, but they're not necessarily expected to live them at the same time. But it just seems we have this inextricable link when it comes to food.
Yeah, I would in a perfect world, I'd love to be the perfect role model for perimenopausal women struggling with weight gain, and but I don't think that that's something that I can achieve, and I'm just doing the best I can with what I've got, and that's it. I would like to understand better for myself and for everybody else what those specific hormonal changes are in early 50s, and how we can fight them. And I've learned something about those from other people. Some experts have written a little bit about this before, but I'd really like to take a deep dive. And I think a lot of it has to do with the drop-off in growth hormone in perimenopausal years. So it's not It's not all about insulin. It's not all about carbs. It's also about other hormones, and growth hormone does drop off. And that's a hormone that helps maintain your muscle mass, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So strength training can improve growth hormone levels, for example. So it's not just all, clearly it's not just all about low carb, because I was as low carb as it gets, practically, and in ketosis and still gaining weight. So what is that about? And that there's something else going on, perhaps many other things going on.
And it makes sense that your needs change and that you have to tweak your diet accordingly, as you were talking before about, and this is, obviously specifically with women, that at different times in our life, we're very finely tuned to perform different functions, and it's all to do with reproducing. So once that reproductive phase comes to an end, it's obvious really that our bodies are going to have different needs. So the output capacity changes. So it makes sense that the input changes, and hence why so many people have to make changes to things that have worked really well for them before. Suddenly, when they approach menopause, everything changes.
That's right.
And they just think it's them who's done something wrong.
That's right. And I think, we like to blame ourselves, but it's usually the last place to look. But I think that when it comes to mental health, I actually gave a talk at Smith College to undergraduate women about hormones and mental health. And I learned a lot in preparing for that presentation a couple of years ago, trying to understand why it is that women have twice the rate of anxiety and depression during their reproductive years compared to men. And I looked and looked and looked and looked in the literature to try to find the answer. And do you know that people don't actually know why it is that suddenly when you go through puberty and during all those years until menopause, that you have twice the likelihood of being depressed or anxious than men do? And the more I dug, the more I came to wonder how much this has to do with our being paradoxically, more sensitive to insulin during those years. And because men are actually surprisingly more likely to be insulin resistant than women are during reproductive years. That kind of surprised me, because I know that women often struggle more with weight and so forth. I just kind of assumed that women were more insulin resistant. It's actually not the case. Women are less insulin resistant.
More insulin sensitive.
Years. And to a certain extent, that protects them from higher rates of other diseases like heart disease and so forth until menopause. And then women, Alzheimer's disease and other types of diseases start to skyrocket. So women are actually at higher risk for Alzheimer's disease after menopause. So it's all very fascinating, and I haven't put all the pieces together yet. But I do think that because insulin and estrogen are both talking to the brain all the time, your insulin and estrogen levels, which are fluctuating with diet and with natural hormonal cycles, are putting your brain on a roller coaster if you're eating the wrong way. If you eat the right way, so-called right way, everything will sort of naturally adjust itself. I don't think we're designed to have mood swings before every cycle. That doesn't make sense. I don't think we're designed to have postpartum depression. That's the last thing in the world evolution would want, is for us to stop caring about taking care of a baby, or actually even want to cause harm to the baby. Makes no sense. These are, I believe very strongly, external influences from primarily environment and primarily diet. There may be other environmental influences as well, chemicals in the environment and drugs and antibiotics and pesticides and so forth. But I think food plays a major role. So there's so much we still need to understand about women and why women are different when it comes to weight, when it comes to mental health. There's so much that's unexplored that we need to start understanding better. We almost always have, studied male metabolism, and that's not the same.
Yes, it's fascinating, and it just harks back to something you were saying before about how we're built to make and store fat. And it made me think, as you were saying, about insulin resistance. And I know that I was consistently insulin sensitive. My blood work always used to come back far from insulin resistance. I think I might have started to head that way, but all my blood markers were good. Yet, I was, I don't know what it is in pounds, 300 pounds or something. And I've read about this, this fact that actually gaining weight like that is actually protecting you against things like type 2 diabetes. And that makes sense from what you're saying, because I know that my body is absolutely perfectly tuned to turn carbs into fat. Yes. My insulin sensitivity, when people say I only need to look at a cake and I put on weight, well, that's kind of what they're saying, isn't it? That if your intake are those kind of foods, your body's perfectly tuned to turn it into what it needs to feed babies and be in a healthy place to reproduce. And it all makes sense from a evolutionary point of view.
That's exactly right.
But that changes when your body changes.
Well, I was thinking about it some more when I learned that. And, men when they gain weight, they tend to gain it in their belly. And they, people say they have a beer belly, even if they don't drink beer. Like, men gain weight in their belly. Most women, not all, gain weight often first in their hips. And that was not true for me. I'm insulin resistant and I'm shaped like an apple. Thank you, Mom. Very much apple shaped. And but most of my friends who were gaining weight gradually over the years were gaining it in their hips. And so they still had a waist, so to speak, which I've never really had. So I think there's that is protective in a certain way, protects your other organs from the impact, and also stores that fat in a way that can be used in the future, should you, want to create another human life. So, I think understanding how we're different can be really helpful, especially in stopping blaming ourselves for these, tendencies.
Gosh, well, all of that's fascinating, and you have so much valuable information to share, but we're going to have to wrap it up because we've gone over time. I could talk to you for hours.
Likewise.
But perhaps you could wrap us up with a top tip for our listeners.
It's so hard to just pick one. But I would say my top tip is that this is not about perfection, that it's about staying curious and discovering things about how food affects your body. Stay open, not just to the carbohydrate intake, but the types of foods you're eating, and not trying to be perfect about it. So if you're eating low carb and you occasionally, have something carby and sweet, just move on, enjoy it and move on. And if you're striving for a particular goal and you've plateaued, maybe it's okay to be at that plateau for a while and give yourself a break. Just don't beat yourself up about it. Just know that whatever progress you're making, even if the scale isn't changing or your mental health isn't improving or your physical symptoms aren't improving, that you're still learning, and that you just give yourself time to do that. It takes time to let the lessons sink in, and just, try not to be too hard on yourselves, and just do the best you can and choose your battles, and don't let other people decide for you what you're worth based on, your appearance or where you're at in your process.
Fabulous. And yes, I do think staying curious is key, because I think if you maintain that perspective, anything that happens that you think is you doing something wrong, in saying that in speech marks, if you're curious about it and actually unpack it a bit and work out what led to that, why you think it happened, you then can learn something from it moving forward, can't you? So actually, it was a good experience to have because you've learned from it.
That's right. I mean, if the alternative is that you beat yourself up and you feel bad about yourself, and then you punish yourself by either restricting too much or by just giving up and just indulging in everything and just losing hope. And I'd rather view it as a learning experience and say, what did I learn from that? And what do I want to take away from that? or just, or it's also okay not to learn anything from it if you don't want to.
Yes.
It's up to you.
Well, I've certainly learnt a lot today. Thank you very much for spending this time with me, Georgia. It's been fantastic.
Thanks a lot, Daisy, for inviting me. It was great.
To get the resources and links from the show, please go to ketowomanpodcast.com. Are you my next extraordinary woman? Maybe you've got an idea for a show, a topic you want to hear about. Let me know how I can tickle your earbuds by dropping me a line at daisy@ketowomanpodcast.com. If you fancy joining me on this exciting adventure and want to help me create new episodes, please go to my Patreon page at patreon.com/ketowoman, or simply hit the support button on the Keto Woman podcast website. It's thanks to the two keto dudes that I'm hosting this podcast. So please consider heading to their Patreon page at patreon.2keto.com and help them bring you more podcasts like this one. Please help other people hear about and find this podcast by reviewing the show on iTunes and Facebook. Every star and review really does help. It doesn't go unnoticed by me, the people who regularly like, share and comment on my posts. Your support means the world to me. Thank you. This week's quote is from Trudy Canavan. If your appearance is all people see, they have no respect for your mind. Bye-bye, Keto Lovelies.